Construction to Last is a podcast by Saint-Gobain about those who invent and live the future of construction. A few weeks ago, Saint-Gobain contacted me to do a podcast on sustainable construction. Saint-Gobain is a French company founded in the 17th century that wants to change the construction industry to make it lighter, more sustainable, and more resource efficient. It develops, manufactures, and distributes different types of materials and solutions for building renovation and new construction, with the aim of improving energy efficiency and comfort for residents. But I'll be honest, I didn't know much about sustainable construction. The term reminded me of wooden houses, solar panels, and that was about it. So I talked to the Saint-Gobain teams and read up on architecture, materials, energy savings, and resource conservation. Little by little, I discovered a fascinating world. There are a multitude of professionals involved in creating sustainable housing, those that promote our well-being and respect the environment. I wanted to hear their stories, because through their stories, the future of construction is taking shape. So I took my microphone with me and went to meet them. I will start at the beginning, the architects. It is from their drawings that a building is erected, so their role is essential. Nicola Delon, co-founder of the Encore Joyeux studio, agreed to answer my questions. He talked to me about the origin of his vocation as an architect.
A guidance counselor directed me towards this profession because I didn't want to specialize. I didn't want to choose one discipline and abandon the others. And being an architect is a very broad profession because you do physics as well as history, or artistic disciplines as well as urban planning or economics. So I thought it was a very open trade, and that's what interested me.
For Nicola, architecture is at the crossroads of several disciplines. The climate crisis has underlined this even more.
It's more like saying that everything is linked, and that the challenge today, as we can see with the different crises, especially the ecological ones, is that we can't take the problems from one angle only. We must have a global, complex vision. Being an architect is embracing complexity indeed.
Nicola studied architecture in Toulouse, Montreal, and Paris. It was there that he met the man who would become his partner, Julien Chopin.
And then, as soon as Julien Chopin and I got out of school, we didn't necessarily want to go to an architectural firm. We wanted to invent our own practice, our own way of working. And so we started with very small projects of scenography or ephemeral urban installations. Little by little, we discovered construction, architecture, and today we have a larger team. We're about 30 people, and we have projects of great diversity.
From the beginning, the two architects wanted to surround themselves with people to carry out their projects. They were dedicated to gathering different professions and sensibilities around the same table.
The starting point was to face up to reality, to make projects, collective projects. This word was important to us, both because we were two friends, at the beginning, Julien Chopin and myself, and because very quickly we realized that the projects that interested us were projects that could mobilize 10, 15, 20, 50, or even sometimes 150 people. So what was at stake was being able to surround ourselves with people with parallel skills and trades like engineers, directors, artists, landscape designers, graphic designers, people who intrigued us, interested us. Thinkers also come from the social sciences, in particular anthropologists, historians, and so we realized that it was perhaps this capacity to mobilize these teams that was critical.
For Nicola and Julien, sustainable construction was an obvious choice, even if at the time the term was much less used than today.
Very quickly, we had a very ecological approach in the etymological sense of ecology, because it's the science of habitat. We also come from the southwest of France, from a rural area, where this question of the elements, the environment, of the context are very present. So we were not comfortable with architectures that denied the context, or that considered that you could make the same building whether you were in Toulouse or Dunkirk.
Taking the environment into account was the first step. Then came the question of solutions.
We realized that after 6 years of study and several years of practice, we had almost no knowledge about the materials we were designing and building with.
So Nicola and Julien embarked on a major research program on construction and renovation solutions. In 2014, they organized an exhibition on resource reuse at the Pavillon de Arsenal in Paris. For Nicola, architects absolutely must take construction waste into account.
You have to know that this represents almost 75% of the waste in the region, and then there is about 12% of household waste and 12% of industrial waste. So this was a bit of a shock or a revelation, and we wanted to explore the issue of reusing materials. How could we do this? In order to take less resources, we have to reuse materials that are already there.
Nicola and Julien worked with reused materials during the renovation of the Hôtel Pasteur in Rennes, Brittany. It's a former college located in the city center that was transformed into a hybrid place, with a nursery school and a space dedicated to digital cultures. The project lasted 5 years until the building was delivered in 2021.
And obviously, with a major renovation of a building of about 6,000 square meters, we worked on identifying the source and the reuse of materials. So we managed to reuse slates, furniture, radiators, woodwork, old sky domes that were transformed into chandeliers, etc.
The Encore Joyeux studio went further than the issue of materials. They also involved people who would use the space, organizing workshops with the teachers and parents of the school that opened on the first floor of the Hôtel Pasteur.
We don't want to start with a preconceived program. We consider that the program has to be made with the future users, the future inhabitants of the place.
The architects have also set up a branch of their architectural firm on the site to be present throughout the project.
This is a very particular practice where we are really present all the time, and it allows us to be very close to the players, the construction companies, the craftsmen, and all the people involved.
For Nicola, it is the combination of all of these approaches that make the Hôtel Pasteur a sustainable building.
It is the attention that is paid to things as they are. The first step is to pay attention to the materials by seeking to reuse as much as possible and generate as little waste as possible. And then pay attention to the citizens and future users, inhabitants of the place, to make sure that the project is in line with their needs and desires.
This method looks simple when you put it like that, but it is not necessarily easy for an architect to take into account all these external elements, whether they are material or human.
When the architect takes this stand, he also accepts not to control everything. He accepts to potentially give up total control, and that doesn't necessarily make for inferior projects. And it's not easy because our profession is really about drawing and controlling or mastering. The project manager in French is called la maîtrise d'œuvre. It means the one who masters the work, so this word is very strong. And here we are exploring gentler, more complex, and more democratic ways of exercising it.
This democratic process does not mean that the architect loses every form of control over the project. He has skills that the general public does not have, and he must keep overall control. But it is also necessary to deal with the sensitivities of the inhabitants and the users.
It's also accepting that everyone has an opinion, that everyone can decide on a color, that the question of taste is very subjective, and that we don't know the secret of good taste, just because we can see the cities around us and the peripheries or whatever. If good taste were the property of architects, we would know.
One of the difficulties Nicola encountered on this program was time. He had to find building materials to reuse, then turn them into solutions and exchange views with the future users of the Hôtel Pasteur. This inevitably lengthened the duration of the project.
One of the biggest difficulties was the gap between the time we needed to reinvent all these methods and the means we had to do it, or the resources we had to mobilize. That's why these are very strong commitment projects, and sometimes it's not easy for us, for the teams, for all the stakeholders, for the craftsmen who worked on the site, who could find it too complicated, too long, and as a result, not economically viable for them. So these are real issues on which we are working with great clarity and objectivity.
For Nicola, sustainable architecture consists in taking into account the needs of users, i.e., to live, work, and feel comfort, while limiting the impact of construction on the environment.
So, on the one hand, we have those particular issues, and on the other hand, this urge to minimize the impacts of our housing facilities. Today, we really need to find this link, this reconnection with living things, whether they are plants or animals, because we can see that we are part of a very broad system. And I have the feeling that sustainable architecture is what puts this principle before all others, before the economic question, before the regulatory question. It is saying that we must really review our priorities and that we can no longer do as we did before.
For the architect, it is urgent. Construction and renovation must be transformed. It is necessary to opt for short supply chains and, as much as possible, the preservation of the resources, the circular economy, and the reduction of carbon emissions.
We really need to go much faster and much further in these transformations. And we can see it from a pessimistic or an optimistic perspective, because this is the challenge of our generation.
Nicola remains optimistic.
When we choose to call ourselves Encore Heureux, which literally means still happy, it's because we try to carry a strongly optimistic vision, or at least to say that our collective resources are very great, whereas our material resources are being drained. So we have to get organized, and we can't get organized alone. We have to get organized together.
Indeed, others are organizing to transform the construction sector and make it more eco-friendly. As Nicola pointed out, sustainable architecture is all about solutions. We must reduce the impact on the environment. Researchers are therefore working on virtuous materials and trying to make them as easy to use and as resistant as more traditional materials. This is the case of a researcher we will hear from in the next episode. Construction to Last is a podcast by Saint-Gobain. Animation and writing, Samia Basile. Production and mixing, Martin Commandeur. Coordination, Bartholomew Bell and Kevin Vergobi.